You know, it's pretty amazing that in just 4 short verses, one chapter of the Quran gives us the most definitive statement on the nature of God and all of Islam. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into that very chapter, Surah Al-Ikhlas, the chapter of purity.
So where does this chapter even come from? Well, its story actually starts with a direct challenge. The polytheists in Mecca and some of the Jewish tribes approached the Prophet Muhammad with a pretty fundamental question. They basically said, okay, describe your Lord to us. They wanted a lineage, something physical they could wrap their heads around. And the answer? Well, it didn't come from the Prophet himself. No, it came as a direct revelation from God. And that very first verse, it's both a command and a declaration that would become really the cornerstone of Islamic monotheism. Say, He is Allah, the One. This chapter is so significant that it's often called the Surah of Tawheed, which is the chapter that defines God's absolute oneness. But get this, it actually has several different names, and each one tells you a little something about why it's so important. Okay, so you've got At-Tawheed, which is all about that oneness. Then there's As-Samad, we'll get to what that means in just a bit, and it's even called Al-Asas, which means the foundation. I mean, it doesn't get much clearer than that, does it? This concept is the very bedrock of the entire faith. Just from the names alone, you can feel how powerful this chapter is. All right, now let's talk about why these 4 little verses are such a big deal. The value placed on them is just incredible. It goes way beyond the literal meaning. We're talking about some serious spiritual weight here. The Prophet Muhammad himself said something pretty mind-blowing about this chapter. He said that reciting it is equivalent in reward to reciting 1/3 of the entire Quran. I mean, wow. So the big question is, how is that even possible? Well, this is what helps it all make sense. Scholars explain that the Quran basically has 3 core themes. First, you've got rulings, guidance for life. Second, promise and threat, stories about reward and punishment. And then there's the third slice you see here, God's names and attributes. Surah Al-Ikhlas nails this third category so perfectly, it basically is that entire theme in a nutshell. It's the very essence of what it means to know God.
And it doesn't stop there. The virtues just keep coming. Reciting it is seen as a way to get protection from all sorts of trouble, both spiritual and, well, just life stuff. There's this amazing story about a man who just loved this chapter so much, he would recite it in every single prayer. And you know what the Prophet told him? He said, simply, your love for it will admit you into paradise. Just incredible. All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. We're going to deconstruct these verses themselves and see how this perfect, powerful definition of God unfolds literally word by word. The chapter kicks off with the command qul, which means say. And this is so important. While the revelation came to the prophet, the command to say is for every single believer. It's not a passive thing. You have to internalize it and declare this truth for yourself. It makes this statement of faith a personal, active commitment. Then we have the word ahad. Now in Arabic, there's another word for one, wahid. But ahad is used here for a very profound reason. This isn't just number 1 in a sequence. Ahad means a unique, indivisible, one-of-a-kind oneness. Someone who is in a category all by himself. There's just nothing else like him. The second verse gives us this incredible name, As-Samad. This is such a beautifully complete idea. It means he's the eternal refuge. Think about it. Everything in creation turns to him for its needs. He is totally self-sufficient, but everything and everyone is completely dependent on him. He's the ultimate source for everything. Okay, so the next verse does a complete 180. We've just heard what God is, and now we're going to hear what he is not. And this line, it's a direct response to some very specific ideas about God that were floating around back then and, frankly, are still around today. This one line acts as a massive theological course correction. It directly shuts down the idea of God having children, whether we're talking about the polytheist claims about angels or certain claims within Judaism and Christianity. It establishes that God is absolutely transcendent, totally free from the biological needs and processes of his creation. And to give you a sense of how seriously the Quran takes this idea, check out this quote from another chapter. It describes the act of saying God has a son as so monstrous, so against the very fabric of reality, that the universe itself is about to collapse in protest. That's how big of a deal this is.
And then we get to the final verse, which is basically the grand finale. It's the ultimate summary statement. It closes any possible loophole you could think of. It says that absolutely nothing, in any way, shape, or form, is comparable to him. Not in his being, not his attributes, not his actions. He is utterly and completely unique. So when you step back and look at the whole thing, you see this perfect, beautiful balance. You get 3 statements about who God is, Allah, the One, and the eternal refuge. And you get 3 powerful statements about what he is not. He does not beget, was not begotten, and has no equal. Together, they form a complete and perfect definition. So, after that deep theological dive, what's the practical application? What does this perfect, concise definition of God mean for us in our day-to-day lives? Well, the source material we're looking at calls it a manhaj, a complete methodology for life. And that makes perfect sense, right? If you really believe he is Ahad, the one and only, and As-Samad, the only one you'll ever need, then it changes everything. It completely realigns your entire focus. In good times and in bad, you know exactly where to turn. And that's how this little chapter becomes your personal fortress. When you recite it and really let its meaning sink in, it's like putting up a shield against anxiety, against fear, against all those whispers of doubt. It's a constant, powerful reminder to place your trust not in created things, but in the one sole, self-sufficient creator. Which really leaves us with this final question to reflect on. You know, it's one thing to understand the beautiful theology of this chapter. The real journey, the real challenge, is to take these 4 short verses and make them the unshakable foundation that you build your entire life on. The analysis in this explainer was based on the sources you see here, and we want to mention that the academic material was prepared by Professor Jabir Mashhabet. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.